Thanks for coming over tonight. Really pumped to be here. Thanks also to the sponsors to make this happen. Really kind. And thanks to Andrew for pulling this off. This is awesome. Right, I think SEO meetups and events are super crucial. That's where I got the most valuable information. Still get the most valuable information. Also got them in the beginning. So Andrew and I, we've been trying to make this happen for almost a year, I think now. And so I'm glad to finally be here. And when we talked about coming here, Andrew was like, hey, why don't you just talk about what really excites you? And what really excites me is, amongst other things, fitness, but this is not really an option. So talking about entities tonight. But on a serious note, I'm talking about entities because I think this is really, really, really important to get right in SEO. Otherwise, you might be left behind. Not in a couple of years, but already today. So before we move on, a little correction right there. I know you got me, Andrew, with the S. It's supposed to be Z. And whoops. And you better don't trip over this thing right here. Well, that was close. But yeah, let's start with the why. Like, why are entities actually important? And there's three big reasons for why. So in general, SEO is getting much, much harder. Compared to 10 years ago when I started and when I came up, it's getting much more complex for three reasons. So first of all, in general, the complexity of SEO has increased because Google is using more machine learning, there are more ranking factors, they're being rolled out fluently, over time. So it's really hard to recognize pattern and really know and understand what's going on. And we'll talk a bit more about the updates in just a second. And so the second reason here is that paid search in general is getting more expensive. This is a slide from the Internet Trends report from Kleiner Perkins, which I can really, really recommend you to read. And it shows that the price for paid search in general is going up. So more companies and more people will revert to organic search to get their customers. And then the third reason is that you're competing with Google more directly. So this is a screenshot from the query buy sneakers on desktop and mobile. You see the fold right here, meaning this upper part is what people see once they search it on Google. And what I'm marking here are all the SERP features that Google shows you to immediately satisfy and answer your question or satisfy your intent. So if you have a transactional intent, you're trying to buy something on Google, then Google will will show you certain ads where you can buy products. It will show you maps where you can buy certain products. If you have an informational query or an informational search trying to figure something out, then Google will try to answer your question directly. So it has shifted in terms of sending traffic to websites, and now it's trying to answer the question that people have right in the search results. So it means you get less clicks on average, so you have to rank even higher and make sure that all your tactics are better. So bottom line, we need to be more efficient. And as we all know, content is one of the big pillars of SEO, or has become one of the big pillars of SEO. So the question is, how can we create better content to get the traffic that still comes through to other sites? And we also have to take into account that more content is created, so we have more competition, and less content is being shared. So this is from a BuzzSumo study that basically shows the Twitter shares over time versus how much content is being created, in this case for the topic of machine learning. But you will see the same happen in all different sorts of topics. So even more competition when it comes to content. And so that's why I'm here to talk about entity optimization. A couple words about myself. Until very recently, I worked for Atlassian. I'm a free agent on the market right now, but I'm also working for the German Accelerator, which is a startup accelerator in the Silicon Valley. And as Andrew already hinted at, I live in the US and work with a couple of companies as well. And I'll show a couple of examples. So we'll start with the more theoretical part, and then we'll switch over to more practical and tactical advice. So let's jump in. What actually are entities? So entities is a somewhat abstract concept, but I'll do my best to explain it to you. Entities can be different things. They can be places, people, organizations, but they can also be concepts or ideas. So for example, when you have a text, you'll see that Google recognizes different sorts of entities, like people, an organization like Google, a date like 2007, or a country like America, and so on and so on. And this is how Google improves its its understanding of language and basically its understanding of content as well. So if I were to try to define what entities are, I would say there are semantic interconnected objects that help machines to understand explicit and implicit language. And this is the crucial part right here to understand. It's not just about the explicit thing you say. It's also about implicit concepts, ideas, trends, all these kind of things. The question, of course, is why Google focuses on entity extraction or on entities as a whole. And there are a couple of good reasons, but here are some of them. So first of all, we all know that there's a lot of link graph manipulation, link building, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of spam out there. So Google actually tries to shift away from that. For a time, the SEO scene kind of assumed that social signals are becoming more important because that's a better indicator for what relevant content is to Google. But right now, it seems a lot like it's entities. It also helps to group content from the same brand or same asset. So if you were to think about an app from a company and a website and a couple of other things that we'll talk about in just a second, then entities allow Google to really understand what is coming from the same brand and what might be different. It's also language agnostic, and it is very supportive of voice search. And we'll dive deeper into all of these reasons. So first of all, if you were to try to do entity extraction yourself. Entity extraction is basically trying to get these entities out of text to process them, to work with them, and so on. Then there are basically 4 different parts that you need. You need an ID to recognize an entity, like an address. And there are MRE IDs that have been written about online. They're basically like URLs, but not the exact same concept. We need tons of data that Google already has because of its corpus or because of the Google index. We need a knowledge base like Freebase or Wikipedia, and remember that Google bought Freebase a couple of years ago, and it's probably exactly for this purpose. And then we need attributes. And attributes are basically the relationships between entities, which help Google to understand the concepts behind them. And in 2012, Google published some data that they already had, this is supposed to be 500 million, by the way, not just 500 million objects in their knowledge base and 3.5 billion facts. And that was 7 years ago. So you can imagine how high that number is nowadays and how good Google's understanding has become. And Google uses a set of algorithms called word2vec to increase its understanding of language. It's based on 2 sub-algorithms. The first one is skipgrams. The other one is a continuous bag of words, which is what the SIBO stands for. And it basically combines all of these words. It looks at them, it looks basically at what word is next to each other, and that on a large scale, and is able to understand how the words are related in the text. For example, what is the subject, object, etc. And then it's also able to cluster your content into categories. And by the way, this is publicly accessible information. This is from the Natural Language Processing API, which I'll talk more about in this presentation. And it shows that Google already has lots of different categories. There are, I think, about 100 to cluster content into and understand what the broader scope and topic of that content is. And with that algorithm, it's able to basically map words or basically transform words into numbers. And these numbers can be mapped onto a vector or a graph. Remember math in 8th grade? That was no fun, but this is. And it basically is able to understand words with the same relationship in different languages. So this here says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these are the same numbers in Spanish. And you see they're almost in the same spot, right? They almost have the same position. And same down here. You have pig, cow, horse. And in Spanish, they almost have the same position. So once you translate words into numbers, the concepts and what they represent become very clear independently of what language you use. And that's highly, highly powerful. At the same time, there are, when you connect these vectors, you're able to understand the relationships between them. And this works in different formats. So we already had the language and country comparison, right? So these are all capitals of different countries. And so, for example, Ottawa in Canada is the same as Moscow in Russia from a conceptual perspective. They're both capitals of a country. At the same time, they're verb tenses and they're male-female relationships. And these are just a few examples of language. And what that allows is that you can use words to put up basic calculations. So if you were to say king minus a man, plus a woman is a queen, that all of a sudden becomes incredibly logic, right? It really helps you not only to understand how many words are on a page, it helps you to understand what they mean. And you can translate that back into understanding what the user is actually trying to figure out and what the user is actually trying to know. So you can imagine, if you were to imagine a graph, you can think of entities like nodes and relationships like edges, right? And so when you were to Google United States presidential candidates in 2012, you have, for example, Mitt Romney, Ron Paul, Gary Johnson, and of course, they're all presidential candidates. But then they're all, of course, living people, right? They're not dead, like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. They're all part of the Republican Party. And then there are other people that also have the last name Johnson, like Andrew Johnson or Lyndon B. Johnson, which have also been part of the Republican Party. But then, for example, Mitt Romney and Lyndon B. Johnson have both been in Medicare, right? So there are all these connections between entities that help Google to understand what they're all about. And if you scale that up 1 billion times, then that's really, really powerful understanding. That's very different from the keyword density that we used to look at a couple years ago, 5 to 10 years ago when I came up, right? You just had to stuff text with keywords. And so this obviously is already being applied, for example, a knowledge graph, where Google shows you lots of different information about all sorts of words. It's also being shown in these carousels over here, where Google is clearly able to understand that all these brands created products for project management software. And it's also being applied to other SERP features that suddenly start to pop out of nowhere, meaning features shown in the search results pages, like these passenger planes. I was looking for Airbus A380, and Google is able to understand that all these are passenger planes as well. But Google also announced that publicly, that they're going to make that shift. And that was in 2012, an announcement from Amit Singhal, the head of search back then. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but he basically said, and this is the highlighted part at the bottom, it's why we've been on an intelligent model, in geek speak a graph, that understands real-world entities and their relationship to one another. Things, not strings. And you've probably heard this things, not strings a couple of times in different blog articles. And it's exactly the shift that I'm trying to convey here. It's the shift away from just amount of keywords in the text and more to a deeper understanding of what a text is actually about. So we've seen a couple of updates this year. And with a couple, I mean almost one update per month. There have been lots of shifts. I worked with lots of bigger brands and sites that lost a lot of traffic. And I and a couple of other people in the industry think that they're all interconnected. These are not updates that happened in isolation, but they all play into a greater thing, which is this kind of shift to entities and entity extraction. And if you want to read a really good article about that, then check out AJ Cohn's Algorithm Analysis in the Age of Embeddings. And while I'm plugging AJ Cohn, also check out the work of Cindy Crum. She has a beautiful 5-article series about entities and entity understanding that really show different applications of the concept in voice search and organic search and mobile search and all these kind of things. But he was spot on. These updates have been natural language understanding updates, meaning Google refined its understanding of what language and content is actually all about. So with all that theoretical stuff, let's actually get to some actionables, like what should you do with all of that stuff that I just threw at you. And that's why I compiled 10 tips to apply that theory about entity extraction. And the first one is to actually build a brand and not just a site. Now that sounds very abstract, but what it actually means is when you have a brand, make sure that you give Google all the indicators that known and popular brands have in search and on the internet. Create the social accounts, maybe do some AdWords spend. Make sure that there are people related to your brand and company, right, as authors or as employees. If you have an app, link it to your site. Obviously, the domain is a strong indicator, a logo is a strong indicator, location is a strong indicator, so don't forget to have the address of your company somewhere on the site. I've seen that forgotten in the past as well. And then obviously, you also want to become an expert for different topics. So when we speak about topics, tip number 2 is to create expert-level content. Now, we've heard that idea of 10x content, but I really want to home in on that because I think it's really important. And at Atlassian, what we did is we created so-called microsites. A microsite is a set of pages that solely revolves around one single topic. And by the way, we had these on subdirectories, not on subdomains, as they're often being used. So make sure that they're in a subdirectory because it's easier for Google to recognize that they belong to the same domain and therefore to the same brand. And these microsites, as I said, all revolve around a single topic. Like here you see the Agile Coach, which is all about the topic of Agile. And you find everything from what is Agile to how apply it to the Agile ceremonies, all the little sub-details and everything that you actually need to know to become an actual Agile pro. We also have the Git microsite, which is about the topic of Git. This is one example of what the traffic looks like over time. Starts at basically end of 2015 until very recently, and we got some nice boost along the way as Google's understanding of language got better and as we continue to build out the site. So think of this expert level content, first of all, of content that revolves around a single topic, but also content that looks like a library, right? Not a series of blog articles where it's mixed with lots of different topics, but as an enclosed kind of library that if once you land there, you can figure everything out about the topic. And then third tip is to use Google's natural language API. So I talked about this earlier. If you go to cloud.google.com/natural language, you can not only sign up for the API and test it out, you can also test it live on that landing page. You can copy paste your text and see what entities Google finds in your content. And I've did that here with an article that I wrote, and it found 461 entities. That's what they all look like. And I mean, look at how many Google can already recognize. These are all concepts, places, people, brands, and whatnot that Google already understands in text, right? So this is massive. And then you can, this is by the way the same landing page. You can also find out the sentiment of each entity, meaning do you write about it in a positive or in a negative context? And very important is the salience here. So salience is a value from 0 to 1 that shows you how important that entity is in the greater context of the article you're writing. So obviously, something like backlinks, linking, chi-rank, etc. These are crucial points and concepts in the text that I wrote, and I want them to appear high up here with the highest as possible salience. And then sometimes Google would also link to the Wikipedia article about that specific topic, and that's a good sign. Because Google relies so heavily on Wikipedia to understand these entities, it is good when they show you that you have a lot of entities that also have a Wikipedia article, because you can make sure that Google has a better understanding of your importance or of the importance of the text that you wrote for that specific topic. And a nice feature as well that's often overlooked are the categories. It's still the same landing page and still the same APIs. So here you can see whether Google really understands what category your content fits into and whatnot. So here it's about web services and business services, so that's pretty much spot on. And Google shows a very high confidence for these two categories as well. So that's really good. And then if you use that, if you create content on a smaller scale but want to make sure it's optimized, simply copy and paste your content into that NLP API and just tweak it a little bit. Just look at what comes up, and make sure that the most important concepts that you're trying to convey are showing up as the most important entities in the report. Number 4 is structure your content, and this is something relatively basic that you learn when you get started in SEO, but I just want to highlight it again. Make sure that your content is easy to read, easy to understand, use lots of headlines, use things like tables, Google loves that stuff, lists, bulleted or numbered, doesn't matter. Just make sure you make it easy to convey not just to a reader, but also to a machine. And the more structured your content is, the easier it is for Google to understand how the different parts, paragraphs, and words play together and how important they are. Don't forget your author. There was a lot of chatter about EAT, meaning expertise and authoritativeness and trustworthiness being an important factor now in SEO. I'm not saying this is wrong, but I'm saying if you're an author that writes on several different sites and creates lots of content, Google will understand that this author is an expert in that specific field and might, and this is an assumption here, might just give you a bonus if you have an author writing your content as well. And I want to stress this again, this is a sheer assumption, I don't have proof for that, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about the relationships of entities. Title, description, related articles, all the fun stuff. Number 5, reverse engineer optimal content through the search results pages. And this seems like a bit of a no-brainer when you think about it, but has proven to be an efficient tactic to create good content over and over again. What I mean by that is use the features that Google shows in the search results pages to understand what Google thinks is important, right? So when you have this people also ask box, and you write an article about how to get upgrades with miles, look at the questions that people show, that Google shows here. You can, when you open a couple of these, Google will expand and show you more questions. So make use of that. Use it for paragraphs, for subheadings, and make sure that you cover all the information that seems to be important here. At the same time, look at the knowledge graph integration, if there is one, and see what data Google shows in the knowledge graph here, right? This is all super valuable and might just help you to become more important for that specific topic. And then there are a couple of more little things that you can use, like Google Suggest is obviously a no-brainer, but still very valuable. There's the searches related to your query. This is at the very bottom of the page or of the search. And it used to be called people also search or people also look for. It's now searches related to, so that's very interesting. Make sure you got that on your radar. And then in the knowledge graph, you now have this people also search for. So get inspired by that. It's really easy to put together a content briefing by just looking at what the search results pages actually look like. And then, of course, schema the heck out of this. So you probably all know that you should use structured data and schema, JSON LD. But there's one that really stands out, and that's the same as item prop tag. And it helps you to say, in code basically, hey, this organization is the same as the organization mentioned in this Wikipedia article right here. Or these are the social profiles for this brand. So make sure you include this nice, neat little tag when you add structured data to your site, because it really helps Google to understand the direct relationships between entities. At the same time, optimize for the search journey. And what I mean by that is when you create content, try to embrace where the searcher has come from and where he's going to next. So what I mean by that is every query, every keyword, right, that brings a visitor to your site has a past and a future. As in, what are the steps that the searcher might have looked for previously, and what are the next ones? And you can use that to show other articles at the bottom of yours, or even mention it in the content. Add breadcrumbs navigations to your page. Make it as easy as possible for the user to get the full bandwidth of the topic within that the query lies in that he was searching for. And this is what I meant earlier with create a library of your topic, and not just banging out different blog articles about different topics. Number 8 is to satisfy intent or nothing. So nowadays, if you don't satisfy the intent directly of the user, you will not rank. This is already a reality. And what that looks like is that Google has given us 4 basic intents. So finding information, finding a location, finding a brand, and buy something or purchase something. And when we look at the search results pages, we're able to identify what Google wants to see right now as an intent. So, for example, buy sneakers, very obvious. Somebody wants to, buy something or purchase sneakers, obviously. But when people ask questions, this is obviously a very informational intent. And when we add all of this together, we're able to identify all these different user intents depending on what search features there are. And I wrote a little article about that called User Intent on Steroids, where it's easier for you to identify what the searcher is doing right now. And it sounds very simple, but in lots of cases it's not. Right? So imagine something like Independence Day. For most time of the year, when you Google Independence Day, you will see lots of results about the movie Independence Day. But closer to 4th of July, you'll see everything about the holiday. Right? So these intents and these entities, they're seasonal, their intent changes over time. Think of something like Apple, right, which is now obviously a brand, but which is also a fruit. So when it wasn't, imagine it wasn't as known today as it is, then you would see something very different, right? So be aware of that and use the search results features to understand what Google is trying to see and what Google is trying to get here at. And the 9th tip is to look at the first 5 results that are ranking and understand what they're writing about and try to be better, right? Not only should you cover and summarize the topic in your content, and this is just an arbitrary, 5 results that I wanted to show here, but you should look at what they're writing about, what their subtopics are, how their content is structured, do it the same and do it better, right? Think about the information that might be missing from these articles, because there's obviously a reason that Google is ranking these so high. And then the last tip is to avoid weak click-through rate. So for a long time, we said, or a lot of people, including myself, said that user signals are really important. User signals are something like click-through rate or time on site. But now we actually have proof. So this is from a site that I've been working with in the health space, very big site that was hit by one of these bigger updates, this one specifically in March. And when I went to the click-through rate in the Search Console, I saw that almost all of the keywords or queries that the site lost traffic for had a really, really weak click-through rate. So if you've been affected by one of the big updates this year, go back to Search Console and check how the click-through rate was before your site lost traffic, and see if maybe a low click-through rate might have triggered the update. I would bet that this is the case. So you can regularly go into Search Console, see which queries show a low click-through rate, and then adjust accordingly. Optimize your snippet, optimize the content, see if you're maybe not hitting the user intent, or see if maybe the content is just old or poorly designed, and make sure you optimize them. So this is a little summary. Not going to go through all of these again, but give you a quick second to take a picture. Yep. If you want to find out more, I wrote an article about that on my site, kevin-indig.com. I write a weekly newsletter, which is free, where I write about all of this stuff. And thanks for your attention.